Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most unbelievable historical transformations on record. Seriously, we're going to trace the life of a single, solitary figure who managed to fundamentally reshape the entire Arabian Peninsula, and ultimately the world. We're looking at the life of Muhammad. We'll explore exactly how he transitioned from incredibly humble beginnings in Mecca to emerging as the prophet of a massive new world religion, and eventually the founder of a completely unified Arabian state. It's a story with staggering historical momentum, and the historical records map out exactly how it all went down. Let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for today. First, early life in Mecca. Second, the call to prophecy. Third, opposition from the Quraysh. Fourth, Hijrah, the turning point. Fifth, the statesman and legislator. And finally, number 6, a unified Arabian nation. Starting with part 1, early life in Mecca. According to historical accounts, Muhammad was born around 571 AD into the Quraysh tribe in Mecca. And his early life, well, it was marked by profound loss right from the start. His father, Abdullah, actually died before he was even born, and his mother, Amina, passed away when he was just 6 years old. Because of this early orphanhood, the massive responsibility of raising the young boy fell first to his grandfather and later on to his paternal uncle, Abu Talib. Now, you have to picture the environment. At the time, the region around Mecca and Mount Hira was essentially this barren, rocky valley. Early texts literally describe it as unfit for cultivation. But crucially, it was a major religious sanctuary, so it's in this harsh but deeply spiritual setting that a young Muhammad gains his early life experience. At 12, he actually accompanies his uncle on a market caravan all the way to Syria, and legend has it, this is where a Christian monk named Bahira recognized his prophetic mission. Fast forward a bit to age 25, and he marries a wealthy widow named Khadija. She was a highly successful merchant, 15 years older than him, and this marriage was a real game changer because it gave Muhammad the financial security he needed to really pursue his own deep spiritual inclination. Moving on to part 2, the call to prophecy. So Muhammad would often go off to seclude himself in a little cave on a hill outside of Mecca called Mount Hira, and it was here around the year 610 AD when he was about 40 that everything shifted. Historian Philip K. Hitti notes that this absolutely pivotal moment, known as the Night of Power or Laylat al-Qadr, marked the official beginning of his prophetic career. After years of quiet, spiritual searching, he experiences this sudden, overwhelming revelation. He reported hearing a voice commanding him to recite, "Thou in the name of thy Lord who created." Fired up by this profound new calling, he begins preaching. And his early message was incredibly crisp and focused strictly on 3 core tenets: the absolute unity of God, or Allah, the necessity of total submission to his will, and a vivid warning about the coming judgment day. As the messenger of Allah, he started gaining his very first converts, naturally beginning with the people closest to him. His wealthy wife Khadija was the absolute first to respond, followed closely by his cousin Ali and his good friend Abu Bakr. Which brings us to part 3, opposition from the Quraysh. Now here's where things get tense. There is a massive clash between his new spiritual message and the economic reality of Mecca. See, the Quraysh elite were the custodians of the Kaaba, which at the time housed a huge pantheon of pagan idols. Because of this, Mecca was the center of a highly lucrative pan-Arabian pilgrimage trade. So, Muhammad's strict monotheism, the Quraysh viewed it as a heresy that directly threatened their wallets. As new recruits, mostly from the lower classes, started joining Muhammad, the Quraysh escalated from just mocking him to active, unsparing persecution. And to make a terrifying situation even worse, Muhammad soon lost his 2 biggest protectors. Both his wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib passed away, leaving him dangerously exposed and vulnerable. Part 4, Hijrah, the turning point. Facing all this hostility, in 622 AD, Muhammad arranged for his 200 followers to slip quietly away from Mecca, and he soon followed them to a city called Yathrib, which we now know as Al-Madinah. Now, you might be thinking this was just a desperate escape, but actually, scratch that, it was a highly calculated, carefully considered migration. He had specifically been invited by deputations from Al-Madinah, who wanted him to come mediate and reconcile their warring tribes. This move, known as the Hijrah, is so foundational that it literally marks the official starting point of the Muslim calendar era. What's so fascinating is how this simple geographic shift triggered a total transformation of his identity. He leaves his hometown as a despised, persecuted prophet, right? But he walks into his new adopted city as an honored chief. The pure spiritual seer we saw back in Makkah sort of recedes, and this highly practical, brilliant man of politics, military strategy, and law steps right out onto the main stage. Let's look at that in Part 5, the statesman and legislator. Once in Al-Madinah, his consolidation of temporal power is amazingly rapid. It starts with the Hijrah in 622. Then, just 2 years later, in 624, he pulls off a decisive military victory at the Battle of Badr against a much larger Meccan force. This was huge. It was widely interpreted as divine sanction for the new faith and really laid the bedrock for his political power. By 630 AD, the balance of power had shifted so completely that he was able to return and conquer Mecca. And immediately following that, from 630 to 631, we see the Year of Delegations, where tribes from all over the Arabian Peninsula literally flocked to Medina to pledge their allegiance to him. That triumphant return to Makkah in 630, absolutely a watershed moment in history. According to tradition, his entry was incredibly magnanimous toward the people living there, but he was completely uncompromising when it came to the pagan traditions. He marched right into the great sanctuary of the Kaaba and smashed the pagan idols, which were said to have numbered 360. As he did it, he famously exclaimed, "Truth hath come and falsehood hath vanished." With that single dramatic act, he firmly established Makkah and the Kaaba as the undisputed religious capital of Islam. Finally, Part 6, a unified Arabian nation. The sheer scale of his statesmanship in his final years is just breathtaking. Think about it. Historically, Arabia was defined by fractured, constantly warring tribes bound strictly by bloodlines. Muhammad dismantled that entire system. Step 1, he actively replaced that ancient tribal blood kinship loyalty. Step 2, he established the Ummat, a community bound entirely by a shared religious faith. For the very first time in Arabian history, social organization relied on what you believed, not whose blood ran in your veins. And step 3, this directly created what historians call a Pax Islamica. Believers were commanded to protect each other, which effectively put an end to the endless internal tribal warfare of the past. On June 8, 632, historical records note that Muhammad passed away in Al-Madinah after complaining of a severe headache. By the time of his death, he was the supreme ruler both spiritually and temporally. He left behind a completely transformed political and religious landscape. Within just a brief span of mortal life, he had called forth out of incredibly unpromising material a nation that had literally never been united before. Which leaves us with a pretty staggering historical question, doesn't it? How did one man, who started out as a poor orphan and a persecuted preacher in a barren, rocky valley, manage in a single lifetime to forge a disparate collection of warring tribes into a unified, powerful nation? It's an incredible testament to the sheer force of his organizational and spiritual vision, a vision that laid the exact groundwork for a religion and an empire that would soon sweep across the globe. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.